get the device audio.
Yep, we should be completely on. Hello and welcome to a fantastic session by the great, fantastic, my pal, Bill Ayres. So, Bill, okay, hopefully it's going to pick us both up on the audio. So let's just move the mic out. So this is a session that I've seen before in one form or another from you. There's quite a few updates to that now.
Yeah, well, I did. If you remember SP24, if you cast your mind back about a year and a half, I did a session on Agile.
Yep.
And this session drills down into test-driven development specifically. So it's sort of like the second half of it, or a more detailed look at test-driven development.
I really absolutely love TDD.
Yeah,
it's one of the things that I push forward at work, and how we test every single rule with our tool as we write it.
That's great to know.
Yeah. So
but you test it first, right? You do build the test first.
Build the test, yes. Otherwise, it wouldn't be TDD.
Anyway, I don't want to give the game away for the session.
We've got a lot of sponsors, so thank you to all the sponsors this session, especially. So just check out the sponsor below the chat and have a read about them. Thank you to all the speakers, all the guys producing, all the anchors who have given their time, and such a fantastic day that we've had here. So it's not over yet. We've still got
5 hours. Yes, isn't it? Yeah.
So what is 8?
It's only 6 o'clock.
6. So we're going till 9. So we've got 3 more hours to go. Yeah. And then we've got to pack up. So it's been an amazing 20 hours so far, and it'll be an amazing 24 hours by the time we're done. Okay, so I'm going to pass you on to Bill. Have a great session. I'm going to just by your side.
Thank you, Hugh. Thank you so much. So let me. So what I did, just need to bring up PowerPoint. No, I don't think I did. So that was the next step, wasn't it? Right, so, yeah. Just remind me. Yeah, the big green button.
Yeah. The top left.
This one?
Yep.
Share.
Yeah. And then minimize the Chrome.
Thanks. Thanks for that. Thanks for that, because I don't quite know what I'm doing here. Okay, thanks, Hugh. So welcome everybody to this session on test-driven development for SharePoint and Office 365. My name's Bill Ayres, and those of you who know me will realize I don't normally talk in quite such a deep voice as this, but like Hugh, I've got a bit of a cold at the sort of a throat, and sort of sore throat come whatever flu thing going on. So it's given me a very deep voice and a bit of discomfort, but it does at least mean that I can do quite a good Roger Moore impersonation at the moment. So I'm an MCM for SharePoint. I've got a bunch of other qualifications, and mainly I do consulting around SharePoint development and architecture, and also for Office 365, and I also do some mobile development as well. So there's some contact details if you'd like to get in touch with me later. I'd be very happy to answer any questions you have if I'm able to. And I'll now press on with the agenda. So this talk is really a follow-on from one that I did in SP24 as when we were talking with Hugh, which is going to drill down on TDD, specifically test-driven development, and we're going to look at some server-side tests. We're also going to look at client-side tests, which is increasingly something that we concern ourselves with. And then if I have time, we'll do a little bit about some of the more advanced techniques, acceptance test-driven development and approvals tests and things like that, if we got time to do it, time permitting, and then we'll wrap up with some conclusions. So we'll get straight in there. So first of all, we'll define test-driven development, and it's something that goes beyond test-first development, which is itself something that was introduced. I think we have to give credit to Kent Beck for this. So you may remember many years ago, among the many agile disciplines and methodologies, XP, extreme programming, was quite popular around the turn of the century. We don't hear quite so much about XP nowadays for various reasons. Other methodologies like Scrum as a delivery process have kind of taken their place a little bit. There's still some teams doing XP, but I think one of the most important things about XP is it introduced a number of agile practices, and one of those was test first development, along with other things like pair programming and a lot of the techniques that we associate with agile development. And test first really says, well, we're going to write a test and then develop some code to satisfy that test. The exact opposite of what we used to do in many years ago, where we'd write some code with the intention of writing a test later, which would be something of a regression test. And as often as not, we never quite got round to writing the tests. And so we get into this situation where we have increasing amounts of code which have no regression tests, and we get a little bit frightened to make any changes to it. And so the code quality deteriorates over time because it becomes too much of a risk to start making any changes, any fundamental changes. So the idea with test first development is that you write the tests first so that you guarantee that you've got tests, and test driven development takes that even one step further, in that we're using really the test to drive the design at the code level, possibly even at the architecture level of our solutions. So it's a bit like the process of evolution in a way that a repeated process that we're not totally aware of gradually results in the emergence of a design and good design of our software. And you've kind of got to try it to understand how it works. And much as in the case of evolution in Victorian days, people didn't really understand how it works. Some people still perhaps don't understand it. And so it's something that's quite difficult to get your head around. It's non-obvious. And one of the strengths of test-driven development is it also supports refactoring. So when you want to go back and improve the code, you can have the courage to make changes, quite fundamental changes, whether it's eliminating duplication in code, or you're going back and renaming some variables, or you want to change the structure in some way. This is a lot easier if you've got the confidence of having a set of refactoring, a set of regression tests that are protecting the code. Kent Beck compared it rather to driving pitons into a rock face as you're doing rock climbing, so that in the event that you do accidentally fall, then you're only going to fall a short distance because the pitons are going to save you. You're attached by a rope to the pitons, and the tests do a similar sort of thing. If something goes wrong, you don't have too far to fall and you can fix it immediately. Now, you've got to remember that TDD is just a developer tool. It's not a lifestyle choice or a religion. It's just a tool to help you with developing and nothing more. And if it's not useful, then there's no reason that you have to use it. I choose to use it. Hugh chooses to use it. We find it's a valuable tool and it helps us, but that's all it is. It's just something to make your development easier, or to make it quicker, or to make it more enable you to produce better quality code. And in my experience, to be honest, I wouldn't say it particularly speeds up your development time, but it's certainly, once you get accustomed to doing TDD, you'll probably find that the development time is about the same, but you'll be able to produce much higher quality code, and which is easier to maintain in the long term. So the cycle is, we start with some requirements, and a little later on we'll talk about exactly what form those requirements take. And then the next step is to write a failing test. So first thing is always to write a failing test, not a passing test, because that doesn't really give you any verification that the test is doing anything. So the test fails, and then the next step is we make that test pass any way we can. Now, we might not produce particularly high quality code to make it pass. That doesn't really matter, because we have another step in this cycle which is called refactoring. And this This is the step where we can improve the quality of the code by, for example, removing duplication, or we just generally improve the quality of the code. Refactoring means you modify the code without changing its behavior. So it's not quite the same as rewriting. And so, some people aren't quite sure what refactoring means. It specifically means making changes to the code, presumably to improve it, but making changes which do not change the behavior of the code. And we'll see a rule that applies to this in a moment. And then we can go back, oops, wrong way. And then we can go back around the loop and write another failing test. And then we'll repeat that process. And all the time, once that we have that failing test, we'll make that test pass, and we'll go through that refactoring step. And all the time, of course, we're making sure that none of the other tests go to red. So at all times, we have a fully passing set of regression tests. And when we've written, we can't think of any more tests to write for that particular requirement, we can move on to the next one. So this cycle is known as red, green, refactor. It's not red, green, blue. I just colored refactor in blue to be a different color. It's called red, green, refactor, and this is the test-driven development cycle. Now, there's a few rules that we have to follow when we're doing this, and one of them is we're not allowed to write any production code unless we've got a failing test. So you can't sort of press on and write code if you don't have any failing tests to write that code against. And then you're only allowed to write just enough code to pass the test. And you can't write a new test until your existing tests are all green or passing. Then we're not allowed to add functionality when we're refactoring, because that's the definition of refactoring. So what you're not allowed to do is things like, for example, having passed one test, you decide to, while you're passing a test, you sneak in a bit more functionality because you're anticipating a future test. That would bypass the TDD process, and that's not a good thing. So you have to resist the temptation to write extra bits of code just because you're anticipating needing them without having a failing test to support it. And similarly, you're not allowed to sort of batch up a bunch of tests and think, you might think of 10 tests that you'd like to write. You can't write them all in one big batch. That's not allowed. You have to write them one by one. Now, you can comment code, obviously, and do things like that as an aide-memoire. That's perfectly permissible, but you don't want any of those. You only want one failing test to be active at any one time. And then the other implication is this, just going back to the previous slide, this loop here, the test-driven development cycle, is really the smallest cog in the machine, which is your whole agile development process. So it's a sort of a mini agile process where you might have a Scrum, sprint if you're using Scrum, you might have sprints or iterations if you're using something like XP, which might then be part of some larger cycle where you're delivering increments into production or something like that. This is the tightest loop, and it's for that reason it has to be extremely fast, and that means the tests have to be fast. So this is one of the biggest problems, is designing tests that can execute very quickly. And I'm talking of the order of a few seconds. So for quality assurance, it's perfectly reasonable for somebody to write a 1 hour test run that runs overnight as part of the QA cycle, as part of a continuous integration.
Hello? There we go. We have audio back. Don't know. Sorry. I must have clicked through.
Okay. So everybody, I'm really sorry, but we seem to have lost, apparently we lost the sound for a while there. I'm not quite sure how long we lost it for. So what I will do, I was at the point of, we'll get that fixed for the recorded version. But I will just run through this fairly brief demo, and let's go full screen, shall we? So that's unfortunate. I'll try and sort of recap what I was saying, possibly while the sound was off, is that there are quite a few approaches, and one of them for building a unit test, rather a test that is sufficiently fast for test-driven development, even if it's not necessarily a unit test. So one thing I did, which was on that test that I showed you before, was we had this fake shopping list repository, which I kind of kept under wraps, but all that is doing is it's going in and giving the results back that we want to imitate the actual call to SharePoint. So that was achieved by injecting that. So there's a process of what we would call dependency injection. So I'm kind of using dependency injection, and I'm using a mocking framework, but I didn't use a mocking framework, and I didn't use a dependency injection framework. I just did it all by hand. So usually when people, if you want to scale this up and do a large amount of this kind of thing, you probably want to use or consider using a mocking framework and some sort of dependency injection framework. But this is functionally all they're doing is they're allowing me to replace a fake, the actual SharePoint repository layer that we've written with a fake version of it. And then we can run tests against that fake version, which will run very quickly, of course, because they're not actually going to SharePoint. But we can also then switch that out and say, right, we will run against SharePoint, and we'll call those our integration tests. And if we can make them fast enough, as you can see from this test run here, so it's all green, so everything's still working, and the tests are running in about 35 milliseconds each, which is pretty much acceptable. You have to make sure that it's x64, by the way, in your test framework to make sure it works with SharePoint. So what we can do is do these, we can do unit tests, we can do integration tests, and then if we actually deploy this solution, so we've been through this test-driven development cycle, just running it locally. We've never actually been up to SharePoint itself. We've never run SharePoint through the UI yet, and we can run that for the first time here, having done our test-driven development, and insert the web part that we've just built blind using TDD and add it to the page with some confidence that it's going to render correctly and give us the results we want. I'm not suggesting that you actually spend weeks and weeks doing test-driven development only without ever deploying to SharePoint, of course, but it sort of illustrates the point. Okay, great. Well, I hope that still made sense, because I'm not quite sure for how long we lost the audio there, but I hope it kind of hangs together. So now, of course, with SharePoint development, we move into the new world of client-side testing. And the new model is using things like SharePoint add-ins, not SharePoint hosted apps anymore, SharePoint hosted add-ins, or we might use a provider hosted app, or we might simply have some application running in JavaScript somewhere in the client, perhaps, that talks back to Office 365 API or the CSOM or the REST API. And we need to find ways of testing that. So we need to find ways of testing JavaScript. Now, fortunately, JavaScript, like most areas of JavaScript, has a a huge number of libraries available for it, and the same is true of unit testing. So we've got a number of options. Now, if we build our client-side code using the sort of model view model pattern, then we've got a very convenient breakpoint where we're going to be calling to the back end, and we can use JavaScript to inject an AJAX response. And we can also do things like, for example, if we've got an isolated view model, we can separate that and run tests against the view model itself. So the view is in the MVVM pattern is data bound to the view model. So we can almost assume that the view is going to work as long and concentrate our testing on any view logic, which will be in the view model, and the business logic is probably going to be in the model class. And in fact, that model class quite typically in these, it's not a very complicated view model, then the view model and model are often combined into the same, I'm wanting to say class, but it's JavaScript, so into the same module or function. And this is a sort of approach that's used by JavaScript libraries like Knockout, but also by Angular, which builds itself as an MVC pattern that it uses, but really it's more akin to perhaps halfway between an MVVM and an MVC pattern. It's a similar sort of approach that involves data binding. And then we've got a pretty wide range of options for JavaScript testing. The one that I've used is QUnit, which is a nice library. I prefer that because it's the closest thing to the type of testing we do with MS Test and that we did when we did our server-side development. There's another one is Jasmine, which is very popular. A lot of people like it. It uses more of a BDD style, which is behavior-driven design. And that's the sort of the given then when. A kind of approach where you try and make the tests look a bit like requirements and sort of an English language specification of requirements. And then there's a tool called Mocha, which uses various assertion libraries and allows you to use different test styles as it suits you. And then you have UI tests, which aren't suitable for test-driven developments, but more something you'd use for acceptance testing using something like Selenium WebDriver, or the more expensive Visual Studio SKUs do have UI tests built in as well. And then what I typically do is run them in the browser window, but you can also run them inside Visual Studio. There's a tool called Chutzpah, which allows you to do that amongst other things and run it inside the test runner window inside Visual Studio. If you're doing continuous integration, you might need some sort of headless browser, so like Phantom.js, that's going to allow you to run your TDD tests as part of your regression suite and as part of your CI process. And then there are also various cloud services that you can use as well, but they usually involve some sort of payment, as you'd expect. So QUnit, really, really nice interface. You create a test simply by calling this function test, and then you can give it the tester name. And the nice thing here is you don't have to put underscores and things like that into it. You can just use any string that you like as long as it's unique. And then there's an anonymous function that you call that contains any assertions that you want to do. So you can do something, use an equal or okay or something like that, whatever the assertion library is. And I've got a little demo here, which I'll just quickly do from here, actually. So we're back with a shopping list, of course, and we can very quickly create a client test project. And in there, I've got a number of JavaScript libraries that I pulled in. So this is the app.js, which is using, in this case, it's using Knockout to do the binding to the view model. So I got my view model class here as well. And then I've got things like I've got an HTML file that is going to actually render the tests. And then in addition, I've got a test.js, which is going to run some tests against the, and very important that we include this somewhere that we can output things. And there's a QUnit CSS file which I've modified because I like to have a nice big green band at the top when a test passes. And then here are some tests that I'm running. These are tests run against the output, the HTML. So I've used, in this case, I've used jQuery to isolate a particular element and run a test against it. If I was writing this now, I probably wouldn't use jQuery. I'd probably use vanilla.js. I just use the JavaScript DOM functions, which are much more reliable now. So you see the result is the output is an HTML page which contains the results. I've also got a set of tests against the view model as well, which I can use. So I can test the view model in isolation. So we can write a test here, and we'll say it should have correct header. So this is very much equivalent to what we were doing before in our demonstration earlier, when we were doing server-side testing. And then we'll do an assertion here. So we'll say, let's check that equals, and then we'll use jQuery to get that output element, which was had the ID of message. It's a good idea, if you don't want these tests to be too brittle, to make them use things like IDs rather than rely on being nested inside the third div down or something like that, because sometimes designers change the HTML layout, which can make your tests fail. So to make them robust, it's a good idea to use something like an ID that's going to be unique. So we'll run that test, and what I like to do is just have the test HTML file just visible in the background, and then use a meta refresh tag in there so that it refreshes every 5 minutes, and then 5 seconds. And then all I have to do is save the file, and then almost immediately I'll be able to see whether it passes or fails. So that's the expected fail state. And then we go in here and we, using whatever technique, we do some implementation. Now, I used a tool called Mockjax. I didn't use it in this example, but I shall just move on to conclusions. I don't have time for these, unfortunately. But we'll move on to conclusions now. But I used a tool in there called Mockjax, which allows you to intercept an AJAX call and substitute some other whatever JSON you wanted to return. So as long as you can capture the return JSON somehow, you can inject that into your tests and simulate the response from SharePoint, for example, or Office 365. So that's a pretty effective way of building a set of tests without having to compromise the architecture or the design of your application. So I think that's quite a nice way to go. So various options there, both for server-side testing and client-side testing. In summary, it's in the broader development field, test-driven development is continuing to be very popular and is probably continuing to gain traction as well over time. For SharePoint server-side developments, we've got quite a few challenges in finding ways of efficiently testing our server-side code. But with SharePoint 2013 and soon SharePoint 2016 and Office 365, we're moving to the add-in model or just moving to generally more off-server types of development, where we're treating SharePoint as just an endpoint that we're talking to, and doing a lot of client-side development in JavaScript. That actually is making our jobs a whole lot easier, and it's kind of allowing us to rejoin the mainstream of software development, where we can fairly easily do test-driven development using a lot of these tools that are becoming available. So in many ways, it's become easier to do test-driven development using these client-side techniques than it was doing the server-side code. So test-driven development, I strongly recommend that you try it. I think you'll like it. It's not the right thing for every situation, but I found that in most of the development projects I do, particularly if there's any kind of logic that needs to be tested, developed, then it's an invaluable technique and leads to better quality code, and I can sleep at night knowing that things are working and that everything's green, and it's a happier developer is a better developer. So thank you very much. I hope that was useful, everybody. I'll just leave some resources up here. There's just a few books that I would recommend reading if you want to get a bit more background information on these different practices. And I'll just put my contact details up there for a second as well, if you want to note down if you've got follow-up questions. But we're going to have some Q&A now in the chat window, if I can figure out how to make it visible. Mercifully, Hugh has come back to rescue me and show me what I need to click.
One question.
Yes.
Do you have a pre-recorded version or a recorded version of this with sound? So if there was a big shot without sound.
Oh dear, that is unfortunate. Yeah, we'll have to make one, Hugh, so that we can put it onto the website. So we'll have to record that. Maybe we can splice it into the existing session, so we can determine which bit was missing. No, that's agile. Yes, yeah, that's agile. Yeah. We'll sort it out so that the record, I can either record over the top or sound, or we can splice in the missing section.
Okay.
Sorry about that, everybody. Yeah, that's don't know how that happened. I assume so, yes. Is that?
Did you not share your screen again before you? Then we cancelled the screen share to get the audio back. Right. Okay. So we'll do a re-recording of this.
Yeah. We'll sort it out. Yeah.
We've got time to do maybe on Saturday together.
Yeah. And they're all Sunday.
No, I'm on a train to Amsterdam.
Right. Okay.
We'll see what we can do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Excellent. Right.
So,
Are there?
that's for everyone.
Yeah. Sorry about that, everybody. Yeah.
Unfortunately, we had no producer free for Bill, so he was producing himself for the first time. So I think
Was I?
for the first time, but we'll get it re-recorded for you guys.
Yeah. We'll refactor it.
Yes.
We'll refactor it.
It's very
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
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 So just remember, test-driven development.
Yeah. Test-driven for the win.
It's not for
Yes.
every project, but
No.
it's really good practice.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's the message, isn't it?
Definitely. Yes. Right.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for persevering, everybody.